If we set our heart too heavily on the world, I'll see how that works. We may find ourselves stuck here. Is your heart set upon God? I have to ask that question every day. His priorities? Or is your heart, is my heart set on the things He says is important? That's the journey. So for today, we've got these verses here. Now I'm reading from the New American Standard Version, but you follow along however you wish. I'm going to start with this section. It says this: "Be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit. Be like men who are waiting for the master when he returns from the wedding feast, so that they may immediately open the door to him when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on the alert when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will gird himself up to serve them and have them recline at table and will come up and wait on them." Whether he comes in the second watch or even the third and finds them, blessed are those slaves. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had not known what hour the thief was coming, he would not have allowed his house to be broken into. You too be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Oh, stay there. Stay there, verses 35. I'm not ready for 38 yet. Oh. Okay. I want the words up there for people to see. All right, you'll have to gaze into your Bible and squint. If you can't, bring your reading glasses. That'll be fine. Because I'm focusing in on verses 35 through 40. But this first part, I want verse 35, please. Yeah, that's fine. That'll do fine. So, he's talking about when a man is getting married and he wants the house that he brings his bride into to be set and perfect. So he has some men to do this. We might imagine them similar to groomsmen, except, they're not there just to be parallel to the bridesmaids. They're there actually to have a job to do. They've got to make that house ready. These are no ordinary servants. They're friends of the bridegroom, and the groom is waiting. He's got to be sure when he comes, and they're not sure when he'll arrive because he may be detained by family or a photographer, usually. You're there, you just got married, and you're all super excited, and you haven't had anything to eat all day, and you're about ready to die, and then they want to do 5 more sets of pictures with every relative you've ever known. Okay. So the fact is that often the wedding party is detained at the place where the wedding took place, but then when it comes time, they're ready to go on back to his house. And this is also a big moment, and there's a big procession as the bride and groom go back to their new home together. So this place has got to be perfect, spick and span, ready to go. And so he sets important men to do this. And so Jesus knows that people would be aware of this metaphor and played it into this parable. But then, as he often does, Jesus twists the parable at the end into something a little bigger than life. So he uses that as the beginning, and then he goes a little bit further. He talks about, blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on alert when he comes. And truly I say that he will gird himself and serve them, and as they recline at the table, and they will come up and wait on them. Well, that's not really going to happen. But he describes it in this extraordinary way because he wants them to understand he's talking about something bigger, right? The kind of rewards of good servants. We start to think about ourselves and say, am I a good servant? Am I worthy to prepare a house for Jesus because that's coming up. Because he's talking about things that he has never talked about before here in this part of his sermon at Bethany. He's already talked about how hard it is to live in the world and what people are going to think of you and what's going to happen, and don't be afraid, God will take care of you. And then he goes into this part about, okay, now how do you be a servant? And that's what we're talking about here. It's germane to our big mission today, or this month of February. We're all kind of getting in our minds, how do I serve Jesus? Right? So, this next part, I want to be sure I get. So then he kind of shifts. And I want you to pay attention to this part, please. Yeah, please move ahead. Thank you, sister. Verse 38. Whether he comes in the second watch or even the third, you know what that is? The second watch is between 9 p.m. and midnight. And the third watch is between midnight and 3 a.m. That was Roman. Romans kept watches. And they always made a big racket at every time they switched watches. So everybody knew when the Romans guard were switching their watch. There were 4 watches over the night. 6 to 9, 9 to midnight, midnight to 3 a.m., and 3 a.m. to sunrise. So you had to know when the watches were. So he said, but even if he comes in the dead of the night, because he might come. Blessed are those slaves. Oh, and he uses the word slave repeatedly in here. Not just ordinary servants, but sometimes just plain old slaves. And I asked myself while I was studying this, why did Jesus choose that word? It's because God has bought you with a price, and he owns you. This metaphor has been used over and over again. I've been bought with a price. But he doesn't just keep me a slave per se. He then adopts me and makes me his adopted son. Right? This is extraordinary that you would be a slave, and then he would adopt you and make you his co-heir with his regular son, This is a big deal, right? So this all fits, this metaphor. I'm not stretching too far, am I? I don't think I am. So then he goes on to say, be sure of this, that the head of house, had he known what hour the thief was coming, he would not have allowed his house to be broken into. Okay, now he's switching the metaphor again. It's the same concept of having a house, but now think about it. You don't know when you're going to be called upon. God may call upon you at any time. Be ready. He had just talked about a man who was very wealthy and laid up all this treasure into his barn, and then he passed away before he could use it. And he made that point rather clear. Don't be too set upon your plans, right? So then he goes on to say, and understand that you will be called upon. The master is coming, and he may come at a certain time and judge you. Don't get too complacent, because there's going to be more to this story as we go. Do you follow me so far? So he goes on, he says, you too be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Now he lays it out. He's talking about himself. I'm coming, and I'm going to come when you not expect me. You may not expect me, and I'm the master. Because this is his favorite name for himself, isn't it? The Son of Man. He's coming when you don't expect, so be ready anytime to do what he would want you to do and to celebrate his coming. Whether you're working as his best friends who are preparing the house for his honeymoon, or whether you're just a servant, serving any way necessary. But watch what happens. Peter chimes up. And when I first read this, I told David, I said, David, this verse doesn't make sense to me. Let me read it to you. Lord, he says, are you addressing the parable to us or to everyone else as well? Strange question to ask. in the past, the Lord had sometimes just had parables that he wanted his disciples to understand. So understand, this is not an unreasonable question. But what bothered me about the question was that Jesus seems to ignore it and just go on, continue preaching. And I thought, that doesn't sound like Jesus. And why would this interruption be included in the text? And so I asked myself, well, I got to find out more. And then I discovered something when I did some digging. I'm going to read the rest of the verse, all right? And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and sensible steward, whom his master will put in charge of his servants, to give them their rations at the proper time. Blessed is that slave whom the master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. Now you'll notice, oh, you didn't keep the underlined. Okay, now I want you to get out your pen. I want you to write in your Bible. I want you to underline the word Lord. You are addressing, and the Lord said, and whom the master, underline that word too. And then down in verse 43, please underline the word master again. The rest of you can do it in your mind. But this is what we're doing. Why do I have those four words? Lord, you're addressing. The Lord said, master and master. Because in Greek, it's the exact same word. That's what I said. So then here we have Peter. Would you read Peter's line there, verse 41?
Lord, are you addressing this parable to us or to everyone as well?
And then Jesus responds using that same word, Lord, who then is that faithful and sensible steward, whom the master, his Lord, shall put in charge of his servants. I think he was looking right at Peter. He's answering Peter's question, but he's also making it clear this message is for everyone. But notice, Peter calls him Lord, and he said, yes, and who shall the Lord put in charge? But a faithful and sensible steward. Now, steward, that's no ordinary slave. It's no ordinary servant. What's special about a steward? That's right, they're in charge. They're like the head servant. A steward can even be in place of the king. A king will sometimes place a steward while he goes on crusade or something. A steward has a very important position. He is a master manager. Sometimes in the Middle Ages, your wife would be your steward while you went and fought for your king. And she had to be smart and capable manager. So a steward is an important person. The steward is in charge of other people. So he's asking the question, now you think about it, you have to be what? Faithful and sensible. Look how Jesus is asking a question. He's doing the same method. It's Socratic, right? He did this before in other sermons. Someone asks him a question, he answers with a question to get him to think. You could just give him the answer, but it's much better to ask a question, isn't it? Thank you. It's much better to ask a question. It gets your mind going. That's why Socrates used questions. Get you to think. Are you sure you believe what you believe? Jesus wants them to be sure because he doesn't want half-baked servants. Are you in this for the tough times and the good times, or are you just here to get healed and maybe get a bite to eat? Remember, he's got so many people in this place that they're stepping all over themselves. It's super crowded here. He's talking to all kinds of people. Some of them are sincere. Some of them just look and want to see this crazy holy man, this miracle man, Jesus. Some of them were very skeptical of him. Some of them were saying he is Messiah. And some of them didn't understand much, but they knew they liked him. To be faithful and sensible. That's the description of a steward. And if you're a coach, maybe you're one of your servants, who's helping out with the team. Maybe like my wife, you're a steward of the hospitality team. She's just the coach. It's another word for it. But they're supposed to be faithful. That means dependable. Like a boss or any manager, you want that person to be dependable. And if you serve that boss, you want them to be dependable too. And they have to be a decent example of, how to do the work right, correctly. The second thing is they want them to be sensible. Sensible. That's a good word. Meaning reasonable. I've had many bosses at the various jobs I've been given throughout my life, my short life. And what are you laughing at? That was not a joke. Okay. Boy, these guys, as soon as he sits down, he thinks he can just make fun of the guy up here. Oh, okay. Whoa. All right. We got this. Okay, I woke up the people that fell asleep. Now, so to be sensible, meaning that because I was saying when I had bosses, I want the boss to be fair, but firm and reliable and compassionate. I want someone to, hey, I made a mistake. Don't kill me on this, and I'll fix the mistake. That's the kind of boss you want, right? That's the person you want to be in charge with. You want to have who's in charge of monitoring your work and making sure it's a big success and leading the team. So that's what this says here, isn't it? Be faithful and sensible. His master will put in charge of his servants to give them their rations at the proper time. Because when you're steward, you handing out everything people need. You got to make sure everyone gets a meal. Boy, you're in charge of meals. That's tough. Imagine, a lot of people are in charge of feeding their children. Imagine if you have to feed 50 people. And make sure the food comes in, gets prepared, and gets cleaned up over and over again. That requires some management skill. So I'm using the same metaphor to get where we want to go. Then he says, blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. So the key here is just be about the good business. Pretend that Jesus could be walking in any minute now. And he finds you doing good, that's great. But you don't want to be ashamed doing that which is shameful or selfish or stupid, because this story gets uglier. There's more to this story. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. So, again, he kind of stretches that out a little bit, that if he does a super duper job, he'll put in charge of all the possessions. I wonder what the Apostle Peter or any of the apostles will have to look forward to when Jesus comes to set up his kingdom. Will he give them a charge over many of his possessions? I got to imagine that he will. So this is a bit of prophecy, isn't it? Christ has no patience with those who abuse their positions. Check this out. Luke 41-44. Oh, awesome. It says here, what did I leave out? No, I got that. I was on to the next part. I'm on 45. That's page 2. Stand by. I got it. It says, but, now this is the what if, because he's going to tell you what happens. And it's not pleasant. This is not gentle Jesus. This is Jesus when he finds people abusing their positions. Listen to this. But if that slave says in his heart, my master will be a long time in coming, and begins to beat the slaves, both men and women, to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. In other words, in a dirty ditch. Not in a graveyard even. That seems a little excessive, and even by the standards of this time. But Jesus, again, stretches that out to describe exactly how he feels about people that abuse their responsibilities. Because look what they did. I mean, you begin to abuse the people who you are responsible for, who are following your orders and trying to make everything come out right. You lay about eating and drinking and getting drunk. You don't care. But notice how conniving it is. My master will be a long time in coming. In other words, I can do whatever I want now because I have the power. Abuse of power is something that Christ has no patience for at all. And those people are in trouble. This is for church leaders. Do what you're supposed to do. And that slave who knew his master's will and did not get ready, and he's kind of bringing all his metaphors together at the end here, eh? Or act according to his will. That's how you're supposed to do, right? Will receive many lashes. So he talks about what will happen to the steward and then those slaves that also fail. See what I mean? You didn't get ready like you were supposed to. You didn't act according to his will, to the master's will. You act against him. You're now his enemy. You've made yourself his enemy and the enemy of goodness. You see what's happening? So he says, yeah, that slave's going to get a beating, a big one. He's going to be punished directly. Slaves could be beaten with impunity by a master in Roman times. It was ugly. I am a man who enjoys history and who likes to, shall we say, study the extremes of the human experience, war and torture and terrible things like slavery. You're property. Someone owns you. A good master, well, maybe you won't get beaten every day, but a cruel master could take you down within an inch of your life. So these are real. Then he goes on. He actually mitigates various levels of disobedience. Check this out. But one who did not know what he was supposed to do and committed deeds worthy of a flogging, he'll receive a few. So there'll be a less weightier punishment on those who didn't really know what they were supposed to do, but they should have known better. And they get a punishment too, because they acted not in accord with the master's will. This is tough stuff to hear. That's because God takes seriously when people abuse others. Sin is sin for a reason, because it hurts people. And so this is how he deals with it. He'll make a scourge and run the money changers out of the temple. Scourge is not fun. Later it will be used on him to save you and me. This is serious. He finishes out, from everyone who has been given much, much will be required. So he ends with a proverb. I'll read it again. From everyone who has been given much, much will be required. And to whom they entrusted much, of him they will ask all the more. So let me bring this down a little bit. First of all, the consequences of good and bad management, God takes very seriously. If you're in charge of other people, do well. It's not as hard as it sounds. Don't abuse. Don't waste your resources. Treat people with honor and respect, both men and women, notice, because God is not a chauvinist. Right? We learned about treating men, we learned about treating women with equal respect to men by reading the Bible. Other parts of the world didn't get that. And where the Bible goes, so does equal treatment for women go. It's consistent, because that's how God prefers it. Equal treatment for men and women. Ugh. But anyhow, abuse of power and privilege will be punished. Incompetence will receive a lighter punishment. From everyone who has been given much, much will be required. You've been given some talents and skills. Maybe if a little, we'll say much. Then much will be required of you. In other words, much must be returned. To require something. It's like the word acquire. So if you're given a skill where you're very skilled at a certain thing, let's say, building houses, then that skill will be required of you. You'll need to use it for good because God gave you that skill and that talent. And then it says another part, which seems like the same, but it's more subtle. So keep your thinking caps on. To whom they entrust much, of him they will ask all the more. So you've been entrusted with something. What is a trust? That is like, I have this building I'm in charge of. I have to take care of it for my master. Or I have this crew that I have to be in charge of at this store. Or I have these children God has given me, and I must care for them reasonably and faithfully. You've been entrusted with that, right? Something's been entrusted with you. All right? I'm going away for a little trip. I'm going to let you take care of my dog. I'm entrusting you with my dog. But if you entrust someone with much, in really important things, not just your dog, of him they will ask all the more. In other words, of him, from him. So you're in charge of important things. People will ask more of you because you're a person in charge. So I think the message here is that if you are a person who is in a position of responsibility, even if it's, you're driving the ice cream truck, if you're in a position of responsibility, then people will expect a little more from you than any ordinary person. Isn't it kind of true? We sort of expect our leaders to be a little better than we ourselves. And interesting that we think they should be better in all kinds of ways, though. They should be morally better, they should be a little bit smarter, and better looking, and probably have better clothes. But it's funny how you think that way. I mean, I got dressed like this. These are some nice clothes I put on some very nice clothes, partly because I wanted you to take me seriously. Like you go, oh, thank you very much, Debbie. But that's what you do, don't you? You take who you are seriously. And if you take yourself seriously, others will take you so seriously too. I learned that being a substitute teacher. And here I am, a substitute teacher again. But I do enjoy talking about the Word of God. So then we might ask ourselves a few questions. What has God entrusted me with? And what does he want me to do with that? Do I dare ask him to show me? That's a question. Yeah, that's right, brother. Yeah. Zach knows this. Do I dare ask him, Lord, you give me some talents. What do you want me to do with this? I mean, I could just use them, to take care of myself and my loved ones, or for my own amusement, or to make a living, whatever. That's fine. That's all good. But how can I use what I have for you? Did you have something particular in mind for me right now? It's fair to ask. I'm always afraid to ask because I'm afraid he's going to say, oh, yes, by the way, I got a plan. But don't be afraid. Take a chance. I want us to take just 1 minute, and I'll be watching the clock, to ask God, each of us, just a minute of prayer. What are my talents? What would you have me do with them?